at you all the way live from East Oakland, California. This is Revolution. And this is our episode about automation. We don't have guests, I don't want to say flake, forget, have miscommunications too often. And a few Saturdays ago, we had that happen. And I will take a little bit of the responsibility for that, because part of my job as the do everything guy behind the scenes is to send out reminder emails. And I just, we've been pretty good with people not reading them. And we got all ready for the show. We're all on air, and the guest didn't show up. But we ended up getting a good show out of it, nonetheless. So they got back to me and apologized. I apologized, and we were able to reschedule. And I'm so glad we rescheduled, because I think the show is better with the rescheduling than it would have been originally. Pascal had asked if we could get show economist Dr. Asatar Bear on. And this actually gave me time to get him on the show. So it's a great discussion, great Marxist discussion on the idea that automation is going to take everyone's job. This is kind of the opposite discussion of the robots will take your jobs. Definitely address in this 2-hour conversation Aaron Bastani's fully automated luxury communism. There's messages of hope. It's not a dystopian nightmare, this show. For those of you that don't know Dr. Asatar Bear, he's been coming on the show now for about a year. An economist I met through another economist on Twitter. I believe his doctorate advisors were Richard Wolff and Richard Resnick. So he comes from that school. He's a Marxist economist. Funny guy. Extremely sharp. Loves having Twitter fights for some reason. So follow Dr. Asatar Bear on Twitter if you want to see Marxist dad jokes and Twitter fights. But all that being said, if you want to watch the show live, you have to go to one of our social media accounts, and YouTube is the best way to do it. YouTube.com/This is Revolution Podcast. The family is growing. The community is growing. Pascal and I were just recently on one of the larger shows on the left, the Majority Report. Not gonna lie, subscribers shot up, so there's more people commenting in the chat, which can be very active, which makes the moderators a little busier. Shout out to moderator John Ross. And this is what we call the free show. So Tuesdays and Thursdays, we do the live stream at 6 p.m. Pacific time. Saturday at 9 a.m. Pacific time, we do what's called the free show. That means we don't stop the show after an hour to go to the patron-only after hours. We just go as long as we want to go. Recently, Glenn Greenwald tweeted out one of our free shows, a show we did with Norman Finkelstein. That's like 3 hours. 3 hours plus. Norm is the homie, and I get to talk to him sometimes on the phone when we both have time, and it's easy to have a 2-hour conversation with Norm Finkelstein. Easy. And to laugh a lot of the time. So all that being said, youtube.com/This is Revolution Podcast. you want to see the show live, you want to contribute to the chat live, exchange ideas with your comrades live. But if you want to call in and talk, you got to be a patron. Patreon.com/BitterLakePresents. On Saturdays, we've been opening up the phone lines. I'm going to try to see what I need to do to get like a whole system. Because right now, cats are just like calling the phone. I can't really have people on hold. It's fun for us. And I like the call-in feature. I like being interactive with the show. For those that are new to this show came out of me. I'm a touring musician. Of course, the pandemic shut me down. This is something that I had wanted to do even when the band was active. The band was not that receptive to the idea. But I do miss being able to interact with people after a show, meet new people. So this the call-in feature is about as close as I can get at this point to post-show banter. I dig it. So on that note, I'm going to be moving out of the way. This is our show with Dr. Aaron Benanav. Dr. Asatar Bear, economist. And of course, the Saturday crew, me, my co-host Pascal Robert, the Saturday homie Marcus from the Left Flank Vets, and I am out.
Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Happy Juneteenth to all those that are celebrating. To all those that didn't know it was a holiday, it is. There you go. There's your factoid of the day. We have a very large panel of people because there's a lot of surprises. I didn't tell anybody who was coming on today. I didn't say, hey, we're getting this person, we're getting that person. But behind the scenes, I've been trying to get all these people. So first and foremost, you may know him as the man that captivated the Sam Cedar Show. I know him as maybe my best Haitian friend in all of Miami and beyond. Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to Great Tomorrow. Peace and greetings to the audience. You know, like no other Haitian people, so calling me your best Haitian friend.
You know what? I actually found some photos. There is a wonderful Haitian woman in New York City who I am actually very close friends with. She's a fan of the show. We worked together at Square. So Coming all the way live from Maine. He is our favorite veteran. Actually, that's not true. You're top five. Top five. He's favorite black veteran under 40 by far. Marcus from the left flank vets.
And everyone, Jason didn't tell you, Colin Powell is actually the favorite black vet above 40. So that's
my dad was ready to vote for Colin Powell. My dad I remember one day my dad sat down and he had Colin Powell's book and he had it. This is like 95, 96. And he goes, Jason, come here, sit down. And my dad never talks like this unless he's yelling at me. And he goes, this man is going to be the first black president. And that's the first time I called my dad the N-word. Now coming all the way live,
right?
California.
I go, what?
You go, what? The fuck did you just say to me, man? I actually told my dad this. Nigga, what? Our favorite economist is also a Asgardian god. You may know him as Dr. Asatar Bear. We know him as the Zeus of economics. Dr. Asatar Bear.
Nice. I was wondering what kind of niche I was going to get put into, but I'm comfortable with that one.
It's better than the teaching booty call. You know? Now,
this next person is a total surprise. He is, I feel very good to say friend of show. We talk a lot on social media. We are about the same age. I feel like he's the only person doing this shit that we're about the same age. We have friends in common. We have music in common. We have the love of food in Chicago in common. His name is Kenzo Shibata.
Kenzo.
What's up?
Uh-oh.
Yeah, this is the second time in like a couple of days Colin Powell's come up. Jason and I were having a little discourse around how Colin Powell is Pete Wentz from Fall Out Boy's cousin. And we're talking about how like if you are connected and you're in the music business, you could fall backwards into money. If you're not rich and connected, yeah.
You'll probably have a drug problem and die in a studio.
That's interesting.
It is. And so that's a different show. Not today. Totally different show. So before we introduce the man of the hour, I do want to say this. If I seem a little like hot, it is hot here, but also Pascal got on me because he's like, Jason, you got to email everybody a day before the show to remind them that they're coming on. Kenzo, you know what I'm talking about. Marcus, you know what I'm talking about. Dr. Barry, you know what I'm talking about. I totally fucked up a couple weeks ago, and I forgot to send the day before email to our guests, and I fucked up again and didn't send them the day before email. So I was sweating like a son of a bitch this morning because I was like, if I fuck this up again, I just can't look Pascal in the eye because he might walk to Oakland just to slap the shit out of me. So that didn't happen. But we're going to be talking about automation. And I made a little video a few weeks ago. Shall we take a look?
This is one of the great mysteries of our time as far as I'm concerned, because we usually associate networks to made up jobs with state socialism. You know, in the Soviet Union, they used to say, well, you know, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. They make up jobs which are completely unnecessary. That makes sense because they had an ideology of full employment. On the other hand, capitalism, that's exactly the thing that isn't supposed to happen. A private firm would never hire someone and put out good money to someone they don't actually need. But in fact, if you talk to people who work for large corporations, they do it all the time. How does that happen? I think part of it has to be explained by political pressure. And in a way, just as in the Soviet Union, there was a central directive saying, we need full employment. They didn't say, therefore, make up bullshit jobs, right? But they didn't say, don't do it. In a similar way, we have pressure from both the left and the right to create jobs all the time. You know, on the one hand, you have the left saying we need public works, we need more money being given to consumers to stimulate the economy. On the right, they're saying give money to capitalists and they'll hire people. But the one thing the left and right totally agree on is the solution to all problems is more jobs.
For many ages to come, the old Adam will be so strong in us that everybody will need to do some work if he is to be contented. We shall do more things for ourselves than is usual with the rich today. Too glad to have small duties and tasks and routines. But beyond this, we shall endeavor to spread the bread thin on the butter to make what work there is to be done to be as widely shared as possible. 3-hour shifts or a 15-hour week may put off the problem for a great while. For 3 hours a day is quite enough to satisfy the old Adam in most of us. That quote from John Maynard Keynes for a shortened work week and allowing more time for leisure, not just for an aristocratic elite, but for all of us, is Keynes' utopian vision of what we could achieve under capitalism. Keynes couldn't have predicted the rise of neoliberal economics in the 70s and the presidency of Reagan in the US and Thatcher in the UK that went to war on labor rights. The gig economy and hustle culture promote longer work hours. The tech world is filled with stories of people feeling forced to put in over 50 to 60 hours per week. But with the rise of automation and technology, are we truly on the precipice of robots taking our jobs? Is capitalism automating us out of work? Or is automation the pathway to a communist utopia? We ask these questions and more. This is Revolution.
Jason, we cannot
Mute.
hear you.
You're on mute, man.
You're on mute. You muted yourself.
I said I had to put a Star Wars clip in there because it's my favorite movie and I want to see if I can get away with it. So, So coming all the way live from across the pond. So happy that he returned my email. Aaron Benanav.
Hey. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks for coming on. I wish you could have seen the look of when you returned that email. I made that video a few weeks ago after going down a bit of a rabbit hole of your videos and then reading entirely too much Keynes. And then also going down a rabbit hole of Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk videos from the 80s, as you can see from the
Spent a lot of time on that boardwalk.
I was going to see if you
lovely night.
if you recognize any of that. Pascal has some questions for you and automation.
So, Aaron, I really want you to thank you for coming on our show. We've been looking forward to having you as a guest for quite a while. One of the first times I even heard your name was on an episode Jason and I did alone talking about what is the left's response to automation. So I'm going to couch the question because there's so much to respond to on this issue. One of the major themes that we have on the show is what we call the 50-year counter-revolution. And what we mean by the 50-year counter-revolution is that basically the period of time from the rise of Nixon and the death and the assassination of Martin Luther King till today, we've basically seen not only a socio-political, but an economic counter-revolution to the New Deal civil rights coalition that came about in the 60s with the advent of neoliberalism that some would argue starts either with Nixon or Carter and carries us out bipartisanly into the 21st century. One of the elements about this 50-year counter-revolution is the rise of automation and the constant chatter that we've been hearing about how the robots will replace us, how, and this has been bipartisan from liberals, the left, and the right, about how technology will make labor obsolete. And even myself have bought into that. For our audience who has not read your book, and I have your book here, can you explain, within the context of the 50-year counter-revolution, how many of these arguments about labor obsolescence really misplace the actual economic trends that have been causing labor precarity in the last 50 years? And I'd like also to have Dr. Osterhalber add in, if he wants to discuss those factors as well. So I'll leave it to you to basically make the pitch about what your book is saying about the 50-year counter-revolution.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's a really great way to frame the question in terms of the 50-year counter-revolution. I really like that that framing, because I think that what I'm saying in my book is like a little, I don't know if this fits exactly into what you're saying or if this is something we should have a conversation about. But it's sort of, my idea is that behind the Reagan revolution and behind the turn to neoliberalism and the attack on workers' rights, there's a kind of prior structural crisis that Reaganism and neoliberalism and Thatcherism, all of those things are really responding to. And that deeper crisis is basically a crisis, an early moment of globalization. Essentially, in the 1950s and 60s, we didn't only have high-speed growth or faster growth in the US, it was even faster in other countries, and especially in the former imperial enemies of the United States, like Germany and Japan, which after the war, with US assistance, built these massive industrial engines and industrial capacities as part of the Cold War, right? And so you had the largest growth of industrial capacity across the world. Also decolonization, the growth of industrial capacity across the global South, especially as more and more countries were becoming independent and adopting various kinds of industrial planning and industrial policy regimes that they weren't allowed to adopt under colonialism. You really had this big spurt of growth that created more and more oversupplied, overcapacitated industrial markets. And in fact, it was even worse in agriculture, which is why many primary producers around the world found that they had to enter industry in some sense, be part of these emergent industrial supply chains, global supply chains, in order to be part of the world market at all. And so with everyone piling into industry and this worsening problem in the late 60s and early 70s of overproduction, I see that trend, which I call this kind of killing the industrial growth engine globally, making it much harder for any one country to grow under those conditions where, industry is not limited to just a few global North countries, but really something happening increasingly in more and more countries, and then to some limited extent across the world. That created the problem, which was capitalists not investing ananymore as much, slowing rates of investment, Keynesian stimulus not generating as many growth effects as it did before, because capitalists could see that their prospects for growth were declining over the long term. And neoliberalism and all the kinds of things you're talking about, the attacks on workers, even the stories about automation, which I think you're right, are meant to distract us from the actual conditions of workers and to scare workers out of fighting for higher wages and better conditions. All of those things were efforts on the part of states to try to get the engine of growth going again. Financialization, which ended up resulting just in a bunch of bubbles that didn't get growth going again like Greenspan expected. All of those compounding efforts on the part of states, they didn't solve the problem, and the economy just kept stagnating more and more. And what that meant for workers is that all of these, this effort to introduce labor flexibility, to make workers insecure, to break the backs of unions, to not respond, to let the bottom drop out of city economies all across America. All of that was part of this strategy of getting back to growth that totally failed, and we live in the rubble of those efforts. So that's sort of how I see the relationship between some of the stuff I talked about. That wasn't as much about automation. We could talk about automation.
Did you want to respond to that, Dr. Bear, at all?
Yeah, I like that. I like that story. I think I think that's accurate. I wonder what theoretical framework you used to understand it, because I confess I did not read the entire book. I read one of the articles, and to me, it sounds a lot like Marx's tendential fall in the rate of profit. I mean, this is right overproduction. When we talk about overproduction, I mean, like Marx is probably the leading economic theorist of that. So I wonder just what kind of role. Let me just sketch the argument for those that don't know. Marx argued that as capitalists compete with one another, they will invest in labor saving technology, and that will raise productivity, raise output, which will lead to a fall in prices, which then puts pressure on the profit rate. And all things being equal, the profit rate will then fall, which causes contradictions, possibly to capitalism itself. And Marx wrote a lot more about what might the countervailing tendencies might be. So, and these are actually very telling, right? He says, well, capitalists are going to try and lower wages. They will through colonialism, they will try to get cheaper raw materials. Accurate in both cases, right? And Marx is writing this at the very beginning of this process, right? Before the large-scale imperialism of the late 19th century. So I just wonder, is that a framework that you use? Is that something that that you talk about in the book?
Yeah, no, that is a huge influence on my thinking in a lot of ways. And I do think that in a lot of ways, what we've seen happen in the last, I don't know, 60 or 70 years is also that more and more countries have really been pulled into the world market. And through decolonization, they've managed to build industrial bases of their own. And that's another effect on the shape of the world market and an entry of additional capacity, which I think Marx's story, like you said there, I think the story about colonialism captures this to some extent, but obviously the actual way these processes played out historically is really important. I think another part of the story, which is really important to me, is I sort of see that story about overcapacity and overproduction, that Marx type story that you described, as really crucial to explaining the long-term kind of running down of the industrial economy. But I think a really crucial part of the story, which isn't as much in Marx, there's some intuitions of it in some way, actually comes from a very mainstream economist who was once head of the American Economic Association, William Baumol, who really pointed out that the service economy just doesn't usually or isn't capable in the long term of replacing industry as an engine of growth, because it tends to have characteristically very low rates of productivity. So my story has these two components. On the one hand, this running down of the industrial growth engine because of massive overinvestments, plus the way that all this additional capacity is coming online globally, running down the industrial growth engine, making it much harder for any one country to grow quickly except at the expense of other countries. And a lot of state policy kind of preventing the bottom from falling out there and affecting the way that that plays out globally. And then the other story, this Baumol story, is a story about why services have been so bad at replacing industry and why the economy, as it deindustrializes. And I think deindustrialization is a really important part of the story politically for breaking the back of industrially organized workers and so on. But I think this other story about the service sector explains the long-term stagnation tendency of the economy, basically, those two things together.
I'm glad you mentioned Baumol. I used to use his textbook to teach one of my macro course, Intro to Macro, and the example that he used in that textbook is a barber, right? And so he talks about, what is 1% productivity growth? Like historically, productivity growth is somewhere between 1% and 2%, if we look at the long term, right? And so Baumol is like, is that true for, say, a barber, right? Like, is a barber getting 1% faster each year at cutting your hair? And the answer, of course, is no, right? I mean, like, there's some new technology in hair cutting, but is it of the mass production kind that we think of when we think of industrialization? Of course not, right? I mean, like, it doesn't take 7 seconds to get a haircut, right? It takes about the same amount of time. Now, they use more technology than they did 100 years ago. but clearly, right, like services are not capable of at that level.
If you go through Marine Corps boot camp, you can't get a haircut in 7 seconds, and it's extremely dangerous.
They've proved it can happen.
I wanted to ask if Kenzo or Marcus wanted to jump in and say anything.
Well, I guess, I mean, for me, I'm very kind of interested in like the fallacies that we were buying into, and like having Aaron kind of explain that of like, oh, hey, you know, like technology is going to save us, and some of the data that you go through in the book to kind of like spell that out. But honestly, like just the barber, right, is like a kind of like a great, you know, subject of just like, you're never going to, well, unless like when we get to the thing where like you sit in the chair, the lasers touch your head, and then you get out of the chair and you just have the perfect hairstyle that you always wanted. Until that, you're still going to have, you know, that, you know, labor intensive person, you know, talking to you, getting trained on how to cut hair and all of those things. But I guess, you know, your book doesn't, you know, it's not about barbers and why they're going to be necessary. It's kind of just like more an expansion of like also parts of why this automation isn't going to be, you know, anytime soon. And the shortfalls in, I guess, what is it, like employment and stuff like that, it doesn't have to do with like machines.
Yeah, let me jump in there maybe, because I can take us back to the automation story pretty easily, which is just that if you look at all of these wealthy economies that are supposed to be seeing rapid automation, what you see is that over the last 50 years, they've all just seen productivity growth decline towards zero in every single country. In the UK, in Japan, in the United States, in Sweden, and Germany, you have this long-term decline in productivity growth rates, which is incredible because the automation story suggests the exact opposite should be occurring, right? The automation story, sometimes people get mistaken about this, and it has to do with how the statistics are actually calculated. So some people say, well, if machines are replacing workers, why would we expect to see higher labor productivity? Because isn't it that the machines are doing more work and the workers are doing less? But that's not what the statistics measure. They just measure, you know, how much are we producing per hour. It doesn't actually look at what each individual worker contributes. And so if we were to remove more and more workers from the economy, if automation was just replacing many workers, it would have to be the case that for every hour of work, we were generating more and more stuff, right? Because there'd just be fewer workers involved in production. And the opposite is what's happening. So it's like for the automation story, there's this problem. Like, why is all of the, you know, if this automation story were happening, you'd expect to see some evidence of it in the statistics of labor productivity. And in my view, what's happening here is just that the automation story, you know, what they see is something very important, which you've already described with your idea of the 50-year counter-revolution, which is that workers are ever more precarious. There's ever more jobless recoveries. There's, you know, people are having a lot of trouble finding and keeping work. Everyone feels so insecure. And they say this must be due to this incredible technological change. They see robots, they look at their iPhones, and they say there must be a connection between these two things. But the connection isn't really, you know, we can talk about the role technology is playing, but in the overall story, the real story is not that jobs are being destroyed faster than they were in the past. It's that jobs are not being created as fast as they were in the past. And it's not because of some qualitative leap in technology. Actually, a lot of technologies aren't even getting implemented because capitalists aren't really investing as much as they used to. So the real story is not lack of jobs due to technology destroying jobs. It's really about just the economy growing more and more slowly. And that meaning that the economy is just generating fewer jobs than it used to. So it's this real slowdown in the economy, and the efforts of politicians to respond to that slowdown with Keynesianism, with neoliberal policies and so on. Those are all the things generating, as it were, kind of the turbulence around this declining trend. Not automation. Automation would make it a really beautiful story. If the automation story were true, the only problem we'd have left to solve would be a problem of distribution. How do we get money out of the hands of the rich and into the poor? That is a really important problem, right, that we need to solve. But the problems we face, I think, are not merely distributional. They're about production and the organization of production. So I'll stop there.
Have I jump in? Really like the haircut analogy, because I think the pandemic has been just a great case study in how education can't be replicated via these online platforms. I'm a high school teacher myself, and the thing is, we were already given a warning about this. Charter schools are this concept where you have these model schools that aren't tied to the other rules of the district or the union contract, and they're supposed to be able then to innovate on different technologies. And one of the models that charter schools chose was an online education model. And what has been found is just rampant corruption, like class sizes of 500 to 1. Essentially, they will cut a deal with the district to run these online schools as an alternative to the in-person public school, and then print out a diploma. And, if a kid logs in X amount of time, they get it. But a lot of times the educators aren't they aren't licensed, because what they'll do is they'll hold the actual offices in a state where charter teachers aren't required to necessarily be licensed, or maybe half or so. And so we're seeing the exact same problems now reoccur in replicating the classroom online via this pandemic. And I think in some ways, because there was such a rush to reopen the economy, there was some intentional obsolescence built into the platforms we had, because really it got to the point where you really run out of things you could do online with the kids. And I was just curious, Aaron, what you thought looking at what happened with education over the course of pandemic. Are there lessons to be learned, and how do we force these lessons into policy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you're totally right. At the time my book was coming out, really at the start, or I guess in the middle of the pandemic, I was finishing it at the start of the pandemic, there were just so many articles that said, this is going to be automation's moment to shine. Robots don't get COVID, computers can't transmit viruses, right? And the reality was, what happened? It was workers, it was working class people who had to jump into the breach, right? And actually do all of this work to keep people's lives, keep people alive and sustain some minimum of human community and care, right, under the pandemic conditions. And that is really important. And, the one company I could find that said they were going to do a big investment in automation due to the pandemic was Walmart. So I wrote that in my book. And by the time the book came out, Walmart had abandoned that policy and said, no, we're going to stick with humans. And obviously that's partially because human beings are really cheap, and it's partially because the technologies aren't that great. But I think the big lesson, that I get from my book and thinking through the pandemic is just what do we need to invest in? What should we be using? We live in such a wealthy country with these incredible capacities to rearrange. Look at the pandemic. We rearranged so much about the daily life of the economy in a very short period of time. And coming out of that, what do we want to invest in, right? Do we want Elon Musk going to Mars or whatever?
Yes, and staying there.
We want to invest in
never totally Aaron, but Mars looked awesome.
If he stays there, I'm fine. I'm cool.
I don't know if you saw the Schwarzenegger version, brother, but
Elon Musk give these people air.
That was the first R-rated movie I ever saw. Maybe that's why I'm so Mars phobic,
Yeah.
There was something you said in a talk you had with Mark Blythe earlier this year. I want to say a couple months ago, where you were talking about the car factories in Sweden. Was it a Volvo factory, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They actually had workers, like groups of workers were actually building cars from start to finish, opposed to using automation. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a really interesting story. So basically, in the a little background that's important here is that in Sweden, they didn't get high unemployment in the 70s. They had very low rates of unemployment until the early 90s. That had a lot to do with the social democratic policies in the country and its position in the world economy. But the key thing is that in Sweden, you actually had really tight labor markets during our era of like the Reagan McJobs machine. And because of that, you had really high labor turnover in these Volvo car factories. Like people would get these jobs and then burn out of them because like advanced car production on an assembly line is such a mind-numbing job that in the 70s and 80s, all these workers were like doing a lot of drugs and there's a lot of absenteeism just to get through the workday because it was really horrible. So what they did in Volvo, facing up to these limits and with a lot of pressure from labor unions, is that they invested in this kind of teams production model at a few plants where instead of building cars on an assembly line, they had stations where cars were built from start to finish by 8 to 12 workers. And it was much more like fulfilling work, basically, for workers. They understood what they were doing. They got to use more skills. The process was kind of oriented towards their actual understanding of how a car works. And after like a year or two, workers on this new model were able to like understand how to build an entire car. Each individual kind of understood how to build a car from scratch. And so it had all these really positive effects on their satisfaction at work. Now, in the early 90s, two things happened. One, the bottom dropped out of the Swedish labor market. Unemployment rates rose to 10%. And the other thing was Toyotaism took the world by storm. And basically you had these very cheap Japanese-made cars with this high-stress model of production coming out of Japan really getting big. And in response to that, Volvo closed these plants, which had only been open for about 5 years. But I think there's a really important lesson there, which is like, I want to live in a world where people go to work, not because they're worried about how to earn their next meal, they are afraid of getting kicked out of their homes. I want to live in a world where people have basic existential security. No matter who they are, what their life experiences are, they should be guaranteed basic conditions of life. And that means having a very different kind of work, right? It means living in a world where work is actually satisfying, where workers have a lot of autonomy, where they get to develop and use the skills they have, and they see their work as having a social purpose. Really hard now to have a car factory where workers see a social purpose because we know about climate change, right? But in general, we want to live in a world where people feel that there's intrinsically motivating reasons to work. And you can just see that that is incompatible with a profitability system. You can't have that. You can't have investment where you actually care about how workers' satisfaction at work is, the kinds of communities that they're a part of, and how work is integrated into those communities, and have a profitability-based economy. So to me, these three things, providing people with basic needs that removes the existential insecurity of the economy from their lives, transforming work like they did at the Volvo factory, only under these very, very specific conditions of tight labor markets, but transforming work to be more intrinsically satisfying for workers and moving away from a profitability system to one where investment is geared toward improving people's actual well-being. And whatever ways are the most important ways to do that, those three things really go together. They're incompatible with capitalism. And they sort of provide us with a model of how we can build a different kind of economy, not by waiting around for automation, right? But by reducing and redistributing and transforming the work that does have to be done so that we can all be more free. We can already do that with the technologies that we have. And actually, digital technologies can be used to promote democracy and human beings making decisions, rather than imagining that, we can take those out of human hands and just have our lives be run by like the computer in Westworld, like Rehoboam, that's just like deciding everyone's lives from some box somewhere in Washington, D.C.
But the question I'd like to present to you, though, is that if you're saying that this fear or paranoia about automation and technology replacing a labor almost in totem, just total kind of like labor obsolescence, is based on the actual economic and labor realities of falsehood, then what exactly is the future of labor in this type of situation in which growth as well as overall productivity are decreasing. And I understand Dr. Bear mentioned that profit is going down. If profit is going down, then why are we seeing a Dow at 20,000? Why are we seeing that all these financial services companies doing so well? Why do we see Amazon making so much more money after the pandemic? I understand that this might be a Marxist axiom, but I see profit going up per se. Are we talking about output? Are we talking about market share? I'd like a little bit more clarification on all of those points, if possible.
Well, there's a lot there, so maybe I'll say a few things and then
Pascal asks very long.
Pass it on, right?
Thesis questions.
Thesis questions. So you're never going to get. What is your favorite type of automation?
No, these are great. These are great questions. I think, obviously automation is happening. Technological change is always happening. But every generation, there's people who think, wow, this is the moment where we finally bridge that gap and we get to full automation. But it never quite happens. There's always some technological barriers that still are yet to be solved. And I think it's really obvious what those are in this case, which is that machine learning and high processor technology just doesn't add up to AI in the way that many people thought. And what that means is that a lot of the technologies we have are going to basically there's going to be some automation, like some jobs being gotten rid of, but most technologies are actually going to still be working with people, and they're going to be part of that general story. The thing is that they tend to be, as Robert Gordon, this economist at Northwestern, has argued, the big new technologies tend to be limited in terms of the sectors of the economy that they've really affected the most. And that's why we've seen, on the whole, this slowdown in productivity growth. And most people who work know that their jobs suck, not because they're appendages to some computer that's doing all this crazy work, but because they're still just like being overworked, right? That's not true, in manufacturing. You do have more and more technologies, but 92% of workers in America work in services, and they are still using often very shitty office technologies and, are not working with very advanced technology at all. So so the world of work in the future, unless we get out of capitalism, looks a lot more like the world of work in the past, I think, just in the sense of workers being overworked, a lot of management by stress, and so on. And it's even worse because it's going to be super hot like it is right now in Berlin. It's like 100 degrees here. And I heard it's really hot in California, Utah, across the Southwest right now too. That's a big, bad future for work. Now, how could it be the case that the stock market is booming under these conditions? That has to do with the background kind of what, some economists, I don't think my old advisor, the Marxist economic historian Robert Brenner, was the one who came up with this, but they call it asset price Keynesianism. Basically, central banks, the government is trying to really inflate the value of assets like the stock market to try to support, basically to give companies a lot of paper wealth and also give rich households a lot of paper wealth in the form of their houses to encourage spending and investment. But these methods of private sector Keynesianism have been less and less effective in actually generating investment and consumer spending. That's why the economy has generally been slowing down. What's going to happen immediately after COVID? I don't know. Things, right now, the economy is moving in 17 different directions at once as people try to figure out what's actually going to happen. So I'm not ready to make any claims about what's happening right in this moment. But the general tendency of slowing economy, ever worsening conditions for everyday working class people, while massive house price inflation and asset price inflation goes on, is actually the, neoliberalism is one part of the story, but neoliberalism has been accompanied this whole time by background Keynesianisms. And we know that in part because the whole era of neoliberalism has been accompanied by really rising debt levels across households, businesses, and governments are accumulating massive debts, and there's massive asset price inflation. It's just not generating investment and economic growth in the way that those theories would expect.
And
Dr. Bear, do you care to jump in? Do you have any comments you want to add?
Yeah. I mean, that's I agree with that. I think that's quite evident. I just want to return to the earlier point about productivity growth, and just try to put it in context, like I appreciate what Aaron said about how the statistic is generated. I think there are certain things that one misses when one takes the aggregate approach as the statistics do, right? Which is basically, total number of labor, total output divided by total number of labor hours, right? So what gets missed here is the distinction between productive and unproductive labor, right? I mean, that is a very old distinction. Marx uses it quite extensively, but it's hundreds of years old. I mean, it goes back to Keynes, for example, right? Like the predecessor of Adam Smith, right? So the question is, okay, there's a lot of workers, right? But who is directly involved with producing the output and who is indirectly involved, right? So like, if we take the case of a factory, right, we could say, look, there's certain labor hours, which without those hours, you will not get output, right? Those are productive workers, right? But then there's a whole bunch of other workers there, right, who do things like, marketing, let's say, right, or branding, or, like all of the things. I mean, and this is, I think, where Graeber comes in and says, look, a lot of these, what Marx would call unproductive labor, unproductive jobs. Now, we have to be clear here. To say it's unproductive does not mean unnecessary, right? Like, if you have a business and you don't market, your business is probably going to fail, right? I mean, marketing is a necessity. It's just, does it directly result in the production of output? And the answer is clearly no, right? So, what we've seen in the advanced economies over about the last 50 to 80 years is we've seen a rising proportion of unproductive labor relative to productive labor, right? And that's interesting, right? That's an interesting phenomenon. If we just bundle them all together and say every labor hour is productive, essentially, which is what the statistics do, we're going to get a pretty misleading picture of productivity, right? I mean, in fact, what's been happening is the productive workers are a lot more productive than they were 50 years ago, right? A lot more. I mean, so, but the statistic does not accurately give that, because this is not how the statistics are designed. They're not designed by Marxists, although there were some who worked in the Bureau of Labor Statistics back in the day, right? But basically, it's an aggregate view which works for, it works for the construction of that kind of statistic, right? So, I think that's just an important kind of context to keep in mind here. And it is the case that while you might need some of these jobs, like in my field, right, I'm a college professor, right? So, if we look at like who is providing the instruction, right, obviously that's the faculty. But where the growth has been in this sector has been in administration, right? Administration has just metastasized, right? And this is, obviously these are unproductive workers, but, you still need them, right? Because colleges need to be accredited. It takes, tremendous amount of administrative work to do that, much more than it did, by the way, 20 years ago. So a lot of, sectors and whatever have a need for, basically an increased need for unproductive workers, because they have a lot of other things that they need to do in addition to, delivering the good or service, right?
And something I think
point here.
When you're also talking about like productivity, and especially with the United States, this is something like, like I highlight a lot on my channel, is just like what's being made, and why. We focus on the military industrial complex, and like if you if you just look at, and this is where, look at the amount of money we spend, look at the way it's produced, way the things that are produced, and like the F-35, jet, to be, for example, it has there's a production done in 48 out of the 50 states, and so like it's like this idea that there can be some type of universal good production for the United States, right? But we all know that these are just, war is a racket. This is just a imperialism campaign that has exploded. It's like, I guess we have to ask ourselves, like, what would that look like in reverse if there was the push to have people come first? And actually stealing a line from a good hip hop artist friend, Napoleon the Legend. But how do you, like, if you're putting people first, what does that then look like? What does farming labor look like? What, like, all of the things that are going on live, around all our lives. But and that also too ties into this, like, the MMT issue, because there is endless amounts. We are already engaged in, the modern monetary theory. It's just that it all goes to the military. That's where that goes. 46% of the discretionary budget, I think. And half of that is straight up Raytheon, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, all of those industries. So I don't know. I guess now I'm just ragging on my soapbox, but I think that's kind of like an interesting thing too, especially too when you're talking about the technological developments of what is being produced, because some of these things that they're making, they're incredible, but they're just incredible machines of death.
Well, on that cheery note, I did want to ask one question to Aaron. The fully automated communism that
luxury communism.
Sorry, that Bastani talks about, and even recently, the artist Grimes, I believe, did a TikTok video talking about how AI was going to lead us. And Grimes, apparently, someone had posted a picture. She was a Stalinist in high school, but a lot of people were a lot of things.
Yeah, can you really be that? You know what I'm saying? Like, come on. Like high school, I
don't know. That's what high school did she go to? That's pretty that was my question. I was like, fuck. It's I don't know if you saw I'm sure you saw the video. It's been making the rounds. She's saying that AI is going to lead us. It's the quickest way to communism, and you totally disagree. And someone in the chat actually asked that question again, like, hey, what do you think about Bastani? Now, we're not trying to shit on Aaron Bastani. I'm hoping our Aaron here doesn't have any kind of hip hop beef with Bastani. Okay. This is just professional disagreement. This isn't beef. Just trying to make sure, clear the air. Can't have gang shit
Don't
happening.
put anything on Twitter.
Yeah. Leave it on Twitter. Yeah. So why the pushback?
Okay. Yeah. So I actually think of my book as kind of like a love letter to the automation theorists. It's not supposed to be like it is a devastating empirical criticism, but what I like about them is I like the kind of dreamer quality of the whole thing. Like, I actually think the visionary quality of it is really important. And I think it gives us a piece of the story of what socialism or whatever, communism, whatever you want to call it, like, it gives us a piece of the story of what it looks like. And to me, the most important thing is this idea that people, they're not going to worry about where their next meal comes from. I get that line really important from an American Black Detroit auto worker, James Boggs, right, who in the 1960s wrote a few texts that were really important to me, had a really big influence on the Revolutionary Action Movement, RAM, on the Black Panthers, on the whole set of 60s and 70s Black revolutionary tradition, Drum, right? All of these people were influenced by these ideas from Boggs. And Boggs was an automation theorist. And he said that. He said, look, this dream of automation is the dream that no one will worry about where their next meal is coming from. And then they can spend their time just engaged in, pursuing their passions, right? Imagining a life of freedom. And so that is, I think the automation theorists have a good dream. And in a way, what it really appeals to me, especially given the horrors of, 20th century breakneck industrialization, Stalinism, which I'm critical of, like, I think that the idea that socialism is a world where people are actually free to pursue their passions and engage in all different kinds of projects is a really beautiful dream. The difference between me and Bastani or other people who think about that as something like fully automated or, linear, computer programming, AI, communism, like Grimes, is just that, first of all, I don't think the technologies are there. Like, I think a lot of people are going to have to work. And when people work, one of the things I said before is people actually need to understand why they're working. They need to have autonomy with respect to the decisions they're making at work. They have to see the purpose in their work. It's very hard for people to see that if they're just being told by a computer what to do, right? So I think people need to be involved in decision making. So that's two reasons. One is I don't think the technology is there. But two, I actually think that insofar as people still need to be involved in production, they need to have a lot of say over what they're doing in order to actually find that work satisfying and to want to do that and to want to participate in it and to work through the conflicts involved. So my thing is to say, yes, we want to have this vibrant society where people's needs are met and they can have fun and they can go out and invent themselves and reinvent themselves and make all these discoveries. But we're going to need to organize on a democratic basis the work that has to be done to make that world possible. And that means not shying away from these old questions, which were really big questions in the 19th and 20th century, questions about planning, about democracy, about specialization and the division of labor and all this stuff, which are the key questions we need to solve to get to that world. And automation is a way of just taking all those really important questions and putting them in a black box and saying, one day the scientists will put the right technologies in this little box and then we can have that world. And I'm saying, no, we can actually have that world right now. And we actually need to exert more democratic control over the way our technologies develop. We need to get a hold of that process and socialize it, just like we need to socialize the economy. So that's like my base. It's not like I don't like the theory of fully automated luxury communism. Look, it's inspiring, right? Like, why did that take off? It's inspiring to people to have a dream of a future world that they could actually be happy in. And I'm saying, yeah, let's make this much more realistic. Let's find a way to make that vision actually realistic and not dependent on, some engineers designing it for us. Let's actually think of this as something we can do together with each other right now with the knowledges and, capacities that we already have, rather than something we have to wait for them to solve, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Aaron, I wanted to ask you a question. How does the rise of the gig economy or the Uberification of labor fit into your understanding of technology, labor, capitalism, if you will? Can you elaborate on that for us, please?
Definitely. Yeah. So I think that the really important thing to see is that work was already being made insecure for all the reasons you guys already talked about, right? Like the 50-year counter-revolution, slowing growth, like removing all these protections from workers, breaking the backs of unions. And in my view, the gig economy is a way that companies have used technologies to really take advantage of these insecure workers. Like in the 90s, in the 80s, it was McDonald's. In the 90s, it was Walmart. And in the 2000s, it's been Uber, and all these, and TaskRabbit and all these kind of companies. So they're preying on insecure workers, and they're using technologies in part to de-skill these jobs, right? Like a taxi driver was a job that needed all these skills, not just driving, but knowing your way around the city. And Uber is taking advantage of these technologies to radically de-skill taxi drivers and make a very low wage taxi sector, right? So that's part, in a way, it's part of the story of capitalism, like Taylorism, de-skilling work and making worker, preying on insecure workers, making them more insecure in order to be able to pay them less. That's part of a more general story. And I think what you would see is that if the labor market ever became tighter, which it does very infrequently, workers just wouldn't take those jobs. They would take the better jobs that are available elsewhere in the economy, right? Workers don't take crappy jobs where their lives are totally controlled by algorithms when they have other options available to them. Most workers who are taking jobs in the gig economy are doing it because their alternatives are not a good job, but a shitty job with an even more shitty middle manager, right? Like the reason why people look to the gig economy is to try to gain some autonomy with respect to these terrible middle managers who make life horrible for people across very large sectors of the service economy. What they find when they actually get involved or get too deep in the gig economy is that algorithmic management can actually be worse, right, than having a horrible human being direct your labor. So that's sort of my general thought about that. It's part of a broader story of workers becoming really insecure and companies preying on insecure workers and using new technologies to find new ways to prey on them to make money. Although it should be said, Uber has never made any money and probably is a kind of shot in the dark, like venture capital project that probably will fail horribly, because they really relied on the idea that they were going to get driverless cars in the next few years to make it all profitable. And that turned out not to be true, and they had to sell off their self-driving cars unit.
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Well, I was kind of like wondering, just like this interesting thing that the gig economy is everything. Just like, oh, what if this, but online is like a huge sector, of a gig economy, starting with like PayPal, but then like Uber, because it's just essentially like, oh, what if this thing that's been established for like markets that have been especially like hundreds, thousands of years old, but online, and as if it's some type of recreation. But I would wonder if that's just kind of like a re-kick of like what you're saying, where it's like this fake productivity, or illusion of an increase in productivity.
Did you want to respond, Dr. Bear? You look like you wanted to respond.
Yeah, I mean, I think I really want to support what Aaron is saying about it's really vital that we have a dream of a future that feels like that's a place where I want to live, and to say we want to transform work to make it fulfilling, I just want to kind of underline that's not happening under capitalism, right? I mean, to organize production for the needs of the many rather than the few who happen to own the capital. I mean, we could call it socialism, right? I mean, we could call it the road to communism. This is not going to happen, under the system that we have, right? It's not something that the slow creep of technology will deliver for us like an apple falling from the tree when it's ripe. And I also just wanted to share a thing that I thought of while we were talking, as I was listening to this narrative about, what does automation look like, or what does increases in technology look like in services? And I thought of this article. I'll post it in the chat. It's in the New Yorker by this guy named Atul Gawande. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but the article is called "Why Doctors Hate Their Computers," and it's a story. I don't know if you read this, Aaron, but it's a story of like, when doctors are, using technology, or it's more like imposed on them, right? In order to, help them diagnose, help them to prescribe, help them, with their tasks, right? But what their experience of it is that all they do is interact with the computer, right? All they do is fill in these fields. They barely can look at the patient, right? And then oftentimes technology also takes over their scheduling, and so they have a very limited, they feel like they're appendages of the machine, right? To use an older phrase from Marx again, right? Do you feel like you are using the machine, that it's your tool, or do you feel like the machine is using you, right? So this is his answer basically of like, why do doctors hate computers? Because they feel like they are appendages of the machine, and they don't have time to interact and put the data in, get the data from they're basically like data entry now, and they don't feel like they're doing medicine, and I mean, I get it, right? Pretty much every field has some kind of, speed up going on, right? Like in teaching in my field, right? Teaching is still pretty old fashioned, but, like at community college, it's like, okay, you teach 10 courses a year, right? I mean, that's our productivity kind of, or that's where they take it out of our hide, right? And by the way, do a bunch of administrative work as well, right? So, that's every field has seen the same kind of thing happening, so you could call it Taylorism. It's broader than just, taking steps out between, so that you don't have to walk as far on an assembly line or whatever, right? I mean, that's also part of it, but it's broader than that, and I think it's quite right to focus on how does that make us feel, right? How does that make us feel about work? Those are good questions that we should be asking very broadly.
Yeah, I have a question for Aaron, but like anyone I think can jump in on this is, with lean production and automation rising, There are just, obviously there are fewer blue collar jobs out there. And Dr. Bear mentioned how at his school administration is rising. And so, we're seeing in some ways like, an enlargement of the professional managerial class. But at the same time, even within the PMC, which, as a teacher, I'm a part of, we're like people like me are seeing our jobs being deprofessionalized. So it's like we were all told to get these degrees to get into these PMC jobs, and that island of jobs keeps shrinking. And I just wanted to kind of throw this out to everyone. What is this going to look like, I think, for the future of the labor market? Like, and what is this? Would this be the future for, social movements as well, considering we're all fighting to be on this tiny island that, we're all going to eventually be kicked off of?
What's really interesting about that is so this is like a general feature of neoliberalism that just has not worked out the way the theorists intended it to. Like, they thought that, marketizing everything would make it more efficient. But it turns out that, trying to apply like market metrics to things like education and healthcare, and like every field of life, and trying to introduce these ranking systems into every field has like dramatically reduced morale across all these fields, has been like incredibly distracting for workers, has generated all of this additional paperwork. And then people like fill out the paperwork wrong, and it generates all these metrics that aren't even useful, right? So it's a really interesting problem, and there's a great book about it called The Tyranny of Metrics, and it kind of compares the ways that contemporary neoliberal American capitalism starts to look a lot like late stage stagnant Soviet socialism, like state socialism, because you just get these societies where, because there's this effort to like centralize decision making and administrators who are not involved in like the on the ground tasks, you end up with these societies of like incredible paperwork and like generating all of this useless quantified data that actually ends up distracting from the main task. But I think the lesson that we should draw from that, right, is on the one hand about how turning lots of parts of life into markets just doesn't work, because actually like mostly what we need to do our jobs is to feel good about the work we're doing, to like think that what we're doing is important, to focus on the tasks at hand that like, actually do something and move the world forward in some way. So I think it kind of says something about late stage, if I could be very optimistic about like late stage capitalism and the limits of technocracy, the limits of centralized control, and the need for something like, a democratic economy that's focused on meeting people's needs. I think in a world like that, I hope there would be less needless and stupid paperwork.
Well, before we go any further, we've been going for an hour now, and I know Aaron is in another country, and I think it's a little later as we're seeing the sun go down beside him in his very dark room.
Oh, that's true.
It's getting a little emo on his end. This is what we call the free show, because we don't cut it off and go to the Patreon app. So we have a lot of new followers now because of Pascal's very fiery appearance on the Majority Report the other day. Aaron, can you stick around a little longer, or you got to go?
Sure. Yeah, no, I can stick around a little longer.
Dr. Bear, can you stick around a little longer, or do you have to go?
I can do a little bit longer. Yeah.
I know it's Saturday, and I know you got things to do. You got to mow the lawn. You got children to play with.
Everybody has to go to a Juneteenth barbecue, man. Come on.
Oh yeah, it's the freedom fish.
If you're invited to the cookout.
Everyone's going to the cookout. It's Juneteenth, and it's a national holiday, and you can have your own cookout. You can have a segregated cookout. Which would be
now. Did everyone get their kente cloth? Everyone made sure to get the.
Not on Juneteenth. You got to wear like.
You don't got to take a knee and do the whole thing. I saw this ridiculous thing where it was like a KKK hood in the kente cloth, and it was like, it made me just.
You know what? I never understood
in a way
the knee thing. Like when Colin Kaepernick was just sitting down, like, man, fuck this. Like I thought that was way cooler than actually the knee thing.
Yeah, he had actually spoken to a war vet about taking a knee, and like that's why they did it.
The knee, like kneel for the fallen and something else. There was a reason why the guy had him do it. So taking a knee, honestly, is like the ultimate like homage to the flag and the troops and all the other bullshit that was created around that. So taking a knee like in your kente cloth is.
Like in all cancel culture, though, like what Kaepernick did was he made a concession, and he said, I'm sorry about the people that I offended, and he made a concession, and it still wasn't enough. They still went after him. That's the thing with cancel culture. You can't give into it, whether it's right or left.
Right? Who makes a concession? I'm so glad that the people that fought for our freedom didn't sit there and hey guys, we're going to protest today on Washington. Do a march. I got my buddy. Hey Philip, can you come over here for a second? We were going to protest. We wanted to know what's not going to offend you people.
Yeah. Well, that's like this like false sense of like this like troop love that anyone in the history of the United States fought for any type of freedom. And like while we're here, just like listen, like the vet, no, you're nothing fucking special. You don't deserve the 10% off, because like most of these motherfuckers, like it's not this idea that you're doing some heroic shit across seas. It's like literally just so we can feed corporations money. That's it, and that's all. Like
back to automation and the economy. Thank you.
What I was gonna say was I think it's time for us to take a few calls while we have people here. So, Pascal, if you could woo people with your fiery speech while I get the phone set up.
What fiery speech? I mean, we have two brilliant guests here who are talking about something crucial to the nature of our economy, the future of society, automation, and the future of work. And you want me to give fiery speeches?
I want you to fill some time so it's not dead air, Chocolate Bar Wonder, while I get the phone ready. All I need you to do.
So I want to ask the question in terms of what exactly are the actual actionable policy options that people who are on the left, who deem themselves progressive, socialists, communists, so what have you, how can we operationalize a project of policy initiatives that we can get behind that address the future of labor under this current precarious or this future precarious capitalism, when we're being bombarded with this notion of capitalist labor obsolescence, if you will, because of automation? And maybe what's more important, and we can start there, is why is the narrative of labor obsolescence due to automation so central to so many segments of the American political discourse? I'd like to hear that. Why is it so important for people to believe that work is going to be made obsolete? What is the advantage, and to whom is it an advantage? Aaron, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, because I think on the one hand, it's the automation story makes a lot of sense because, I mean, first of all, as I said, technological change is always happening. So there's always stuff you can refer to when you tell that story. But I think the reason why it appeals so much is it implies that, like, as we're once said, like the fundamentals of our economy are sound, right? It kind of implies that, like, behind the scenes, whatever the problems are, the economy is doing great. Private entrepreneurs are like driving things forward in this way. And it kind of obviously was a big support for Silicon Valley elites, right? Claiming like, we're making the world so much better, but we're worried about the consequences of that for the average worker. And it sort of focuses things on, it kind of leads to a situation in which people are both excited about the future and fearful of it, but in a way that leads to not protecting workers, right? Like workers are so insecure, but if jobs are going away, like why protect the workers? If Uber drivers are about to be replaced, why protect the Uber drivers, right? And what we've seen in the past few years, especially in America, is this tech backlash, where people are realizing, hey, all these big companies, the FANGs, Facebook, Amazon, Google, I guess also Uber isn't a FANG, but like among those kind of digital companies, hey, these companies are not trying to make our lives better. They're actually like really making people's lives worse. There's a lot of fears about the consequences of monopoly power for the economy and all of that. So there's a real backlash against that. And the question is, I think that you asked is like, what should we do, right? Like, what are the policies we can undertake? And I think even if you're not let's socialize the entire economy tomorrow kind of person, which I think is a very reasonable view. But if you want more short-term or medium-term policies, I think we've seen a few proposals. One, reduction of the work week, right? Which would massively improve workers' bargaining power, free people, give people some of the gains of productivity that we've received or seen at least without receiving the benefits as much over the last 50 years, right? So just shorten the work week, 4-day week or something like that. It have to be introduced over time, but that could massively affect workers' bargaining power, give people a lot of freedom. We've also seen proposals, obviously, for strengthening workers' bargaining power at work, and a whole range of proposals for kind of like, taking power away from over the way work runs from corporate boards and kind of involving more other people in that, right? But I think that like in the end, a lot of these changes, or basic income, a lot of these changes people are proposing will not make that big of a difference unless we change the way investment happens in this country. If ruling class people, a very small number of people, retain control over investment in this country, they're going to be the ones who decide how much the economy grows or shrinks. They're going to respond to more workers' power by threatening to invest even less in the economy. And so we need a program basically of public investment. We need to invest more in the things that matter. We need to invest in, inner cities. We need to transform cities to be more for the people who live there rather than just about gentrification and pushing them out, right? We need like investment in greening the economy. We need all kinds of social investment geared toward making people's lives better. And I think if you're an MMT Keynesian person, you're looking at 0% interest rates and you're saying we should use our capacities to just directly improve people's lives, that's a good start. I think the thing I would add to that, the real problem that we see today is that technocracy is a real danger. We've had all these, rule by technocrats, rule by experts, and Keynesianism really promises more of that. And we don't want that. We want to democratize the economy. We want to have everyday people having a lot more decision-making power, right? In what actually determines their lives, whether that's their schools, their communities, the bigger ways that society provides healthcare and other kinds of goods and services. So democratization, public investment, and reduced work week, those are, I think, some places we could really start to change things, not just in this country, but around the world.
We got our first caller. Caller, what is your name and where are you calling from?
Hey, this is On Your Left, in Massachusetts.
Oh.
So to introduce myself, I'm a bit of an industry insider, I guess you could say. I work in AI, a big tech company, lonely Marxist over here. So first of all, Aaron, I want to say I appreciate your book. I think a lot of the takes that I've seen so far about AI are super oversimplified and reductionist, and I appreciate your ability to complexify this story, especially, both the takedown of, hucksters like Elon Musk and John McAfee, right? But also on the other side, the luxury communists who I think underappreciate the actual core behind this and sort of their belief in the inevitability of luxury communism, where we can't just have a society where it's rich people on top grinding poor people in the service economy to a pulp forever. I think that actually is a sustainable model. But I do think there's a couple of things that I kind of think that your book missed, and I read it 1.5 times to make sure that I feel like I understood your argument. So if you don't mind, I'd like to dive into a couple of points.
Go for it.
Okay. So I think, you rightly differentiate between automation and augmentation of labor. However, I think what a lot of people take away from that is, okay, we're not going to have automation of jobs. But especially when we are talking about what we conceptualize as knowledge work, which I hate that term because all work is knowledge work. But when we talk about knowledge work being like lawyers, doctors, analysts, traders, things like this, that work is very fluid, which means that automation and augmentation allows them to redefine that work so that if you can reduce 80-90% of the workload, right, you have way less people. So that job category has not disappeared, but it still exists. And I think Dr. Vera pointed out that the aggregate statistics about this are incredibly misleading, because you have to look within industry where the top firms are flush with capital. And particularly with the burgeoning of cloud computing and AI becoming commodified since 2008, this wasn't the case post 2008, right? You're really going to see that the larger firms are able to switch from this capital expenditure model to the operating expenditure model and instantly amortize any expenses that they're spending to displace labor. So that's really what I wanted to talk about is, you know, with these new technologies being so easily available and so liquid and fluid, I really see automation and augmentation driving a bifurcation of labor that pushes people that were previously analysts and lawyers and, you know, physicians assistants into jobs like, you know, Uber driver and things like that, therefore increasing the precarity and lowering wages and working conditions across the board. And sorry for my Pascal question.
Can we take your answer off the air?
Yep.
All right. Thank you. Thank you on your left.
Yep, bye.
Great. I think that's a really fascinating kind of take. And I think it's really interesting to think about, like, yeah, which of these kind of professional jobs and categories are going to like lose workers in the future. I think a distinction that the caller made there that's really important is that it might not be possible to like automate these jobs out of existence, right? Like already 10 years ago, we heard that there weren't going to be any more radiologists, right? That was a job that everyone said was going to be automated out of existence. There still are tons of radiologists. Like those jobs haven't really disappeared. But what we might see happen is that these technologies are able to make radiologists more productive. So radiologists can look at more images. And it doesn't mean that all radiologists are going to disappear, but it might mean that we need fewer of them, right? And so the question is like certain kinds of doctors, like radiologists, lawyers, different kinds of professionals. I mean, we really saw the limits of this with regard to education during the pandemic, right? But people used to say teachers as well, getting replaced by these things. How far is this going to go? I think it's a really interesting and open question. I think my view, it seems to me that, and I'm not a tech, I kind of stayed away from the technology questions and I focused on the economic ones, right? Because technology, I'm not an engineer, so that's not my specialty. I do think that more and more engineers are pointing out that machine learning is actually going to be less successful in fully replacing a lot of these jobs than we thought 5 years ago, for example. So I'd be interested to see if the caller is right about that. Something to keep in mind is that this is just a normal process in the economy, right? This has been going on for like hundreds of years, that jobs get replaced in this way. I think that what the caller's statement, so I'm saying open question. I really don't know how many lawyers are going to be gotten rid of by these kind of machine learning, cloud-based, narrow AI type programs. But what I think is true is that today the economy just isn't growing fast enough to create a lot more jobs to replace the ones that are being destroyed. And that means that workers who are in industries where their jobs get destroyed, they are being thrown into this pool of insecure workers. I don't really think that's going to happen to lawyers because, they have a lot of skills and they're going to be able to kind of float there. A lot of them will be able to float their way back to the top. But I do think that's a big question. I think there are versions of this question that aren't about the United States that to me are much more frightening, like technological developments that really could break through in certain industries. So for example, around the world, very problematic, like we saw in Bangladesh with the collapse of the Rana Plaza, factory, is like the garment workers all around the world. So many people work in garments all around the world. It's like a major source of foreign exchange for a number of poor countries. And it might be the case that advanced robotics is finally able to make sewing something that a robot could do. Because for now, You see pictures of this all around the world. People are basically still working with Singer sewing machines that are like 100 years old. So it could be the case that these new technologies allow for breakthroughs in things like sewing that suddenly eradicate huge numbers of jobs across the economy. Of course, as Joan Robinson said, what's worse than being exploited by a capitalist? It's not being exploited at all, right? It's like being unemployed. And so we could really see that these technologies lead to breakthroughs in specific industries, and that because the economy as a whole has been slowing down, that lack of dynamism makes things really hard for people. And I think on the global scale, it can be very, very severe. And we should keep that global perspective in mind when we're thinking about these changes for the future.
I'd like to ask a question about something that's been proposed as a silver bullet to these situations of economic precarity. What are your thoughts on the universal basic income propositions of figures like Andrew Yang or others? I'm not, whether you're a fan or not, or universal basic income overall as a solution to the future of labor precarity. I take answers from either Aaron or Dr. Bear or both.
Did you want to take this one, Dr. Bear? I think you've been asked this before at some point in time. And
yeah, sure. I have a couple of things to say, but then I actually have to go at 10:30. But so I just want to echo, like a lot of things that Aaron said, I totally agree with. And I think the point about, who controls the labor process, and this dovetails with questions about alienation. Again, how do you feel about your work, right? But the larger question that I was really pondering was about where do we go from here, right? And what kind of strategies operationalize things. And I think of, capitalism makes certain promises to us. And I think that these, the bluff should be called, like the promise is this, okay? If you are willing to work and you do the work, then you'll be paid and you'll get a decent income, right? Now, you could say maybe capitalism doesn't promise that, but I think it does, and I think even if it doesn't, we should demand that, right? Because that's the discourse of like the last few hundred years of wage labor, right? I mean, if you're working full time, you should be able to support yourself. Am I right? I mean, I think that's a broadly shared cultural thing, right? And we should actually demand that, because the reality is not that, right? I mean, and everyone knows this, you could be working full time and not earning enough income to support yourself or have a decent life. And I think we should just immediately demand that. Now, is that staying within the strictures of capitalism? Right. Yeah, it is. I mean, but I thought we were answering the question like, short of calling for an immediate revolution, since that doesn't seem to be, I don't know, maybe that is in the cards. I'm not sure. Right. But I think just demanding the promises that capitalism has made, demanding that they be fulfilled. Right. Or how about this, right? Full employment. I mean, everyone should have a job who wants one, right? Like, does the capitalist economy provide that now? No, absolutely not, right? Why don't we make it so that it does provide that, right? Or how about like, okay, you're willing to work for, full time or whatever that means, right? Should you have healthcare so that you don't die and are then unable to, produce output, right? I think the answer is like pretty clearly yes, right? So, I just think it's interesting, or we could say housing, we could add education, right? And with education, I'm like free tuition that's the absolute minimum. Education is work, and you should be paid to do it. This is something that the Soviets had right. They paid you to go to college. You need that if you're going to take it seriously. You'll be working another job in addition to it, right? Obviously, and then we can talk about reducing the work week, right? Then we can talk about who is in charge of the labor process, right? But I think we start with just the basics, right? That everyone needs to live a decent life, and say, we want these things, right? The economy should be structured so that everyone has these things, not, oh, if you work really hard and you get the education and are really lucky, then you can have a decent life, right? Okay, what percentage are we talking about? Who's actually gonna make that, right? I mean, like I'm a professor, right? I'm tenured. I feel very lucky that hey, my life financially is pretty stable, and I'm very grateful for that. But I'm in the minority here, right? I mean, most of us know precarity. That's our lived experience. So I just think we start by demanding the things that capitalism's already promised.
Dr. Baird, thank you very much for taking the time and hanging out with us today. Tell the family that I personally said thank you for letting us borrow you today on a Saturday.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure to be on the panel.
And the beard trimmed up with the long hair.
It looks good. It looks like,
depending on what you got on, it's Sons of Anarchy.
Yeah, since we've been talking about barbershops and stuff, right? Aaron, really nice to meet you. Kenzo, nice to meet you. See you again. And Pascal and Jason, always a pleasure.
All right.
Take care, you guys.
All right, peace.
Aaron, do you want to take that UBI question?
Oh, we got a call. A call.
Okay.
Caller, what is your name and where you calling from?
Hey, I'm Clay from South Carolina.
What's up, Clay? What part of South Carolina?
I'm in Charleston, the Low Country.
I'm not going to tell Pascal I played a show there, but I definitely.
Tin Roof?
No, I was there with a bigger show. I played a show at a place called New Brooklyn Tavern in West Columbia back in the day.
Oh, yeah.
And I was in Charleston with Yo Gabba Gabba. So that was a whole different
what?
Oh.
Yeah.
This guy's played a show in every state, city, crevice of America.
Deal with it. What is your question?
Come back to Charleston on the road.
It's probably in the works. Go for it.
Yeah, so I have a question for Aaron. So it's kind of a more big picture, less nuts and bolts question, but so I'll try and keep this kind of short, but I used to be more of a techno optimist. 10 years ago, I was like, oh yeah, we would have self-driving cars by now. And I was like, yeah, that's a great thing. Cool. And then now we can all see that, Elon Musk is a total huckster in that regard. Uber, like Aaron mentioned, sold off their self-driving car unit. Coincidentally, that was right around the same time that Prop 22 passed. I think those were related.
Mm-hmm.
And then, basics like housing, the way that people traditionally built wealth who weren't born into it, totally falling out of reach for the middle class, whatever. And financial bubbles are getting even bigger. Assets are inflating like crazy. So, if you're not already in there, tough luck. And so now we got Prop 22 passing. It's impossible to get anything like the PRO Act passed. And, that everyone can see in the papers that the, financial elites, for lack of a better term, are trying to turn the country into a nation of renters. What do you think about the techno-feudalism story? And also what on your left said about just further bifurcation of the market the labor market where, less and less people are able to find good jobs and more people are being, driving for Uber. And I say this as a software engineer who fell out. I got laid off last year and I still haven't found a new job yet. So just big picture, techno-feudalism. Yeah.
I think that's I'm really sorry to hear about your job situation. And, I've been one of these academics who moves through a series of precarious jobs. And I've felt a lot of existential insecurity in my life. And I think that's had a really big effect on how I think about the economy. And I guess that I think that the thing about let me see, it's just so shitty, right? Especially I think for people under, let's say 40 who've now experienced 2 so-called once in a lifetime economic depressions in like the, you know, in the early years of their, or early to mid years of their careers, we all know about the devastating effects that this is going to have on people's lives. And I think that's why we see all of these people, you know, now many middle-aged people as well as younger people, just like getting involved in social movements and being interested in these questions of like, what's the alternative, right, to neoliberalism. And I think that that's a really, and to capitalism, I think that's it makes our moment both deeply pessimistic, you know, deeply sad and scary, and also gives a little bit of hope because people are resisting and fighting and looking for big answers. As far as the techno-feudalism thing goes, I think, you know, the scariest thing to me is like if they get these robot dogs like at Boston Dynamics off the ground, right? And imagining a world in which the costs of repression become so low and aren't carried out by human beings that like it really becomes the case that possibilities for resistance fade away. I think when people talk about techno-feudalism, I'd be curious to like think about that topic more. When I think of techno-feudalism, the feudal part really stands out to me. And what is a feudal economy? A feudal economy is one that's built on patronage relationships. So it's like, you know, you have like people who are very wealthy, and then under them, all their servants who have like a personal relationship to their masters because they can't leave, right? They can't go somewhere else. They're like trapped in this situation. And all around the world, we see that, you know, there are many places where patronage relationships and quasi-feudal or agrarian relationships are still the norm for many people. How they receive their incomes is that they have to, you know, be part of communal or, you know, other kinds of networks connected to very powerful elites in order to survive. And there are very few opportunities for them, as in capitalism, to like leave their employers behind and move somewhere else. So I don't really think that we are there in our society, like in the United States. I'm obviously calling in from Germany, but I don't really think we're yet anywhere near the situation where people like really can't leave, you know, and kind of move from bad employer to bad employer in a way that really makes them tied into specific kinds of patronage relationships. I do think that we're looking at a world of massive inequality, you know, a world of, like really intense precarity for many, many working people. But I think that the specific, like the end of the market society and the end of civil society that the term techno-feudalism suggests, to me, we're not really there. And I also think if you look around the world at places where those things do exist, which they do, you know, you'll see that like we're not, you know, there's a huge gap between what we're experiencing and that world. But I think that, if that makes sense, so I think that the techno-feudalism captures a very negative dystopia that elements of our world are tending toward. And if you want to read the greatest book about it, I really recommend Snow Crash. It's a really awesome sci-fi novel about a samurai pizza delivery guy in a techno-feudalist future, and his sidekick, who's like a delivery girl on rollerblades, and also very, you know, kind of, I don't know, it's a cool sci-fi story, but I don't think we're there yet. That's my basic point. I think we're living in a decrepit version of capitalism still. That is not to be a long time before it becomes techno-feudal.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I guess it all just feels like totally out of democratic control. I really like the sort of policy propositions that you mentioned earlier, but yeah, just at this point seems so far out of democratic control any of this that, you know, we'll see what happens. But yeah, thanks.
No, thank you for calling, and take care. Have a good Juneteenth.
Mm-hmm.
Peace.
Zippity doo dah. Okay, Dave.
No, it was like, oh shit. Okay. Pascal, you haven't smiled all day today.
You don't know that. Yeah, I just wanted to
address something before you ask a question. Can you table? Look, I'm tired of people confusing me with DJ Lance. I'm not DJ Lance. DJ Lance is like 15 years older than me.
I'm about to make a meme.
Taller.
This
is what I did on tour with Yo Gabba Gabba.
Damn, that's rude. What are you doing?
That was it. That's all I did.
Is that the?
There's a call coming in. Should we take the last call?
Go ahead.
As long as it stops ringing.
Hold on.
So hot here in Berlin, guys.
That's wild.
Do we lose Jason, or is he's taking a call?
Well, and Aaron, are you just like have to be in like the hottest room in the place, or is it just like no matter where you go, you know, or
Yeah.
like
It's like 100 degrees and it's about to storm, so it's like very. But outside, inside, I don't know how hot it is in here, but we don't have AC really. And
Do you want to take a quick shot at the UBI question while Jason's?
yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, I mean, I always, whenever people ask me about UBI, I always say, you know, it makes sense that people support UBI, like especially in America, right? We have a racist welfare system with means testing that is just designed to make poor people feel terrible for asking for help, right? So we live in a society where like the appeal of UBI is immediate and obvious because of the idea of universal benefits. And that's why, you know, the national welfare reform organizations from the 1970s, which were led by Black women in the United States, like they were in favor of UBI. And a number of other radical groups were in favor of UBI because anyone experiencing the horrible American welfare system would want a universal alternative to means testing. So I'm deeply in favor of universal benefits. I think the problem with UBI is, first of all, that basically like UBI was proposed by people often don't know this, like really right-wing economists like Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek were some of the first people to propose that. And one of the biggest proponents of UBI, this is so disturbing, is Charles Murray, who you may have heard of. He's like a really horrible racist, and he is a major proponent of UBI. And if you read the UBI literature, you would be amazed, like disgusted and horrified by how often people just refer to Charles Murray's proposals without identifying him as the racist author of the bell curve. You know, all these authors refer to him. Actually, Andy Stern, who used to be head of the SEIU, who wrote the book, he actually proposes a conversation in his book between Martin Luther King and Charles Murray about UBI, which blew my mind, like in terms of the way that, you know, this stuff. And now I'm not trying to say, you know, guilt by association, because again, there's a lot of really great people who've advocated UBI as well. The question is, what's the difference between the right wing and the left wing one? The right wing one is a cheap replacement for existing welfare programs.
Yes,
that try to just, you know, convert existing welfare programs, which are often very specific, and help people who actually, in many cases, can't afford to help themselves, right? Think of like Reagan turning all of these people, you know, our asylum system was bad, but think about Reagan turning all these people with extreme mental disorders out on the street to become homeless. Giving those people some money, right, won't help them with their specific needs that they have. So the right-wing version is like replacing the welfare state with a cash payout for poor people that gives them a very, very, very minimal income, but isn't really enough to support them. The left-wing version is much more expensive because it says we should actually give people enough money to live a decent life. The problem, in my view, I mean, there's a lot of other things you can say about UBI, but just to focus on one main issue is that if the automation theorists were right, and we were living in a society where the economy was growing super fast, we had all of this production we didn't know what to do with, and all these workers who were unemployed, the idea of UBI would make sense because we would just give people money so they could buy this massive amount of stuff that the economy was producing ever more. We don't live in the world the automation people are talking about. We live in a stagnant economy racked by austerity, you know, by demands that governments spend less money, cut down their welfare programs. And I think that under these conditions, it's much more likely that if the UBI program were adopted, it would look like the little, you know, measly UBI that replaces welfare programs proposed by the right, rather than the beautiful highway to communism proposed by the left. Mm-hmm. Because it's kind of counterintuitive, but the left proposal actually relied on the kinds of economic growth we had in the 60s and early 70s, which was when UBI was first introduced, it would be much harder to imagine that under the conditions of stagnant capitalism today. It would give rise very quickly to this zero-sum struggle between capital and labor. It would improve workers' bargaining power in a way that would actually probably discourage capitalist investment rather than encourage it. And all of that just points to the key question, which in my book I call the conquest of production, control over investment. So we live in a society where control over investment is maintained by a very small number of people because wealth is highly concentrated in our society. Very few people at the heads of corporate boards and in some very powerful positions of government make these big decisions about investment. And that determines the size of the economy. And right now, capitalists for many decades are just not really investing very much. That's why the economy isn't growing. That's why we have financialization and bubbles. And so we need to take that power to shape our economy back from this very small number of people. Back is the wrong word. We never had the power. We need to seize that from them and invest around human needs rather than, and that's the key thing, is gaining control over investment. UBI could make sense if we had the control over investment, but without that, it won't really be effective. And it's much more likely to fall into the trap of the Charles Murray version, which is very scary to me. So again, just to summarize, I really promote and embrace and rejoice in the positive vision of universal benefits that take people out of existential insecurity. I don't think UBI is the silver bullet that will get us there. It's much more likely in our economy to look like the bad Andrew Yang, Charles Murray version than it is to look like the positive, highway to communism version. If that makes sense.
And UBI, universal basic income.
Yeah.
And there's a issue with UBI as well, as far as just like the system that it would exist in as of now, is like without certain controls over the things that people need to survive, then at that point it's just, hey, landlords start jacking up rent, things, just products, and that healthcare would, skyrocket even more than it has been, and all of these certain things. So it's like, it's kind of a non-starter without a certain robust amount of guarantees, just that, for the material conditions of everyone in the country, whatever, size you're actually talking about. But
yeah, in a way, right? I think UBI alongside instead of UBI or alongside UBI, universal basic services captures something really fundamental about the world we want to live in, which is a world where where housing and, healthcare and transportation and phone, internet connectivity, all of those things are kind of universally provided to people. But once you start to think about that world, you think about how the way we work has to change as well, right? Because in a world where people, get all of this stuff guaranteed to them, we would have to change the conditions under which we work as well. So you start to see how all these things are actually much more connected to one another, right? Like, to get to universal benefits that actually give people security, we have to reduce and transform and redistribute work and gain control over these big investment questions that determine the shape of our economy. Like, are we investing in providing food to poor people in cities, or are we investing in, I guess the Elon Musk going to Mars kind of thing, right? We have to control those big decisions that shape our world.
People want to go to Mars for the 3 boobs, man. Let's just be honest.
I'm telling you, Total Recall, man.
Looking for the 3 boobs.
It really traumatized me when I was like 10.
That's what people want, man. They saw that scene in the Mars cantina and they're like, look, I'll take the skin flap over my eye vagina, man, to see 3 boob lady.
I got a question, I guess kind of everyone, he's like, Aaron wants another book published, so no comment. I got a question too, because we talked a little bit about, I guess, the motivations of the argument that automation is always at the doorstep. And I was wondering if, like, we can, I don't know, what the opinion of everyone is like. Do you think there is some type of at least understanding by capital that there's always that they can utilize the threat of automation to tamp down labor struggle, labor organizing, making strong demands, because there's, that workers now believe that, just because a kiosk went up in a grocery store for you to check out a little bit faster, even though that's still manned, they just see that and then assume my job could go away at any moment.
Yeah. No, I think that's totally right. I mean, 20 years ago was like the idea of factories going abroad, right? Like the runaway workplace that kept workers in line. And I think you're totally right that, a lot of these jobs, what would it mean for Walmart to go overseas? I mean, Walmart's production obviously has gone overseas, but what am I going to do? Buy my groceries in another country? Like a lot of these jobs, they can't go overseas. So It makes sense that instead it's like automation is the threat, right? That draws us away from the necessity to focus on workers' conditions in the here and now. And I think the amazing thing that's happened, especially during Corona, but even a little bit before that, is that people are fighting back against this, right? They're saying, wait a second, this is just like a ruse. Like Silicon Valley is not acting in our interests, right? This is just like a strategy to prevent us from looking at the actual working conditions in Amazon warehouses and in Walmarts and all these different places. And so I think people are starting to fight back. What's scary is how much, as one caller mentioned about Prop 22, right? How much money and resources these companies have to fight against efforts of workers to improve their conditions. And that's why I think it's going to take a lot more big social movements and a lot more organizing and educating work and all this kind of stuff to kind of build the power that we need across all of these different spaces and these connections and trust between people to work together to really change things. And I think we're starting to see that. And that's why I'm pessimistic about our conditions and their direction, but I'm very optimistic about the future. Maybe wrongly, I don't know. Maybe you have to be a little bit crazy optimistic in order to get through your day sometimes, right? But I do think that people are that protest is becoming legitimate, and that people are thinking about how bad the world is, and they're not just only fighting to improve their own little conditions, right, at the expense of others, but thinking more politically and trying to find ways to work together to change things. So I have a lot of hope for the future, and I think you actually even see that in the tech world itself. Like the story of the last few years is that even tech workers are not believing the bullshit anymore of their bosses, right? And even people in tech are now coming out and explaining how crazy it is, and how much a lot of these stories about automation and AI and narrow AI like machine learning is happening, but a lot of the big AI claims are just bullshit that people wrote into their product proposals to get venture capital money or to get money from the government, and it's just these lies that are now reproducing themselves. So anyway, I wanted to end though with that positive idea that people are already coming together and fighting and seeing how bad conditions are. And I think that's a really important and hopeful thing that we're seeing right now.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us. Wherever you are watching this show, there are links in the description to Aaron's book, his website where you can follow him, his Twitter where you can follow him, like his tweets, be Twitter friends, or even have beef back and forth.
Yeah, it's called mutuals, okay?
Mutuals.
So don't follow me on Facebook because I lost my Facebook password and they won't give it back to me. So I have some dead account on there. Twitter, I'm on there.
Well, Aaron, thank you for your time. Enjoy your lovely Berlin evening.
Thank you.
And
hot Berlin evening.
We will hopefully we can have you back on the show again. Would you be willing to come back on again?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Hey,
great talking to you guys.
You say that shit now. I'm going to hit you up in like 3 weeks.
It's not really fair. It's like when you get some black people like,
say again. What'd you say?
I just said, just email me one day beforehand to remind me.
That's it. That's like, we can ask anything. It's Juneteenth. Like, they're not allowed to say no. They gotta say yes.
We get because of the holiday.
Yes.
Thank you, Aaron.
Great.
Thanks, man.
Okay, Aaron.
Have a good evening, brother.
Thank you so much.
And on that note, when you hear that music, it means it's about time to go.
I mean, we're just gonna leave that in the chat. We're just gonna leave it in the chat.
What was in the chat? Somebody said something?
What is it? Rin Shane was asking about Pascal and his thing with DSA, and I was like, we're just gonna leave it. We're just gonna leave it.
not even try to go there.
Okay, all right. I'm an instigator. I'm sorry. I apologize. Cue the music.
I thought we were gonna cue the Pascal music.
Oh,
Add music now?
No, I just want to make you think you did. I was this close to making a whole like house 90s song for you. And then I realized that I'm just tired and it would have sucked. I would have phoned it in and it wouldn't have been very good.
Yeah. Well,
and when I do stuff like this, I want to make sure it's good. And you know what's happening? What's happening now is this is the show is over music. Or nigga, you talk too long. Whenever you hear that music. I'm very happy that Aaron returned the email and he came on today. I'm also very happy that all the dates worked out. We could have Dr. Bear on because you know how much we love Dr. Bear. Dr. Bear has been coming on this show longer than I've been doing a show with Pascal.
That's true.
And for those that don't know, Dr. Bear, his doctorate advisors were Richard Wolff and Richard Resnick. So he comes from the Wolffian Marxist school, if you will.
Big brain.
Yeah, man, love Dr. Bear. And when Pascal was like, we got to get Dr. Bear on this. I was like, yeah, we got to get Dr. Bear on this. And then going back and forth with Kenzo, I was like, it would be hella cool if we brought Kenzo on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. This is fun.
No, it's fun to not host something for a second. Not have to control shit for a second and just sit back and you can just say crazy shit. It's always fun. Pascal?
Yes, sir.
Once again, I love you like a play cousin.
You my man on 40 grand.
Marcus, of course. Hugs from Oakland.
Warm hugs, cold hugs from Maine.
Callers, thank you guys for calling. The last caller, I couldn't tell if it was a caller or a bill collector because this is my regular phone. So one of these days, I'm going to fuck up and the bill collector is going to come. So I'm glad we take most of these calls on the Patreon part because that's going to be mildly embarrassing. Chat, thank you guys. New members, welcome. Yes, someone said watch The Great Awakening at 0 books. Please watch The Great Awakening at 0 books.
Subscribe to our page, hit the bell. Check out This is Revolution on YouTube. This is Revolution on all your podcast apps, Apple, Spotify, SoundCloud, Podcaster. Hit the bell on YouTube, subscribe.
Class time as well.
Class time. I was putting links up to everybody's stuff. So definitely follow Kenzo, Class Time with Kenzo Shibata. Pascal's going to be on the show. Kenzo has like a meet the press of the left where he brings you on and drills you with questions.
June 27th.
The paper that day, motherfucker.
6 p.m. June 27th. Pascal will be on. It's going to be a good app.
Kenzo, I always record in my tuning, which is drop F sharp. So I hope you can't tell that guitar is in drop F sharp.
Cut is banging.
That's I know that's my favorite. When that comes in, like
F.
yeah.
That if you saw the string, like Kenzo plays guitar, if you saw the string I was using, you'd be like, damn, dude, you're tuned so. Thank you guys for checking this shit out. Thank you for the super chats, Todd Buckingham. We appreciate that because you know what these super chats get us? Good Wi-Fi. Has Pascal been tripping out? No. You know what? Good listener support. They got Pascal a long ass cord.
I've been saying it for a long fucking time. It's not that expensive.
And now it's my turn to fucking get the long ass cord. I told homegirl, I was like, look, man, that little motherfucker is going to have to sit still for a minute because if he trips over that shit, I might light his ass up like the 4th. I'm just
Oh yeah, I got gaffer's tape everywhere. At least the stream doesn't break up.
This looks like a stage.
Yeah.
All right, people. On that note, we're gonna go out with 80s cartoons because
Hell yeah.
I love 80s cartoons.